The hospital at night was a different world. The fluorescent lights cast eerie shadows, and the hum of machines was the only sound accompanying my footsteps. My shift had just begun, and tonight, I was the only nurse on this floor. It should have been routine, but something felt off. I checked on my patients, each one tucked into their sterile beds, their monitors beeping rhythmically. Room after room, everything seemed fine. Still, an uneasy feeling gnawed at me, like someone was watching. I shook it off as exhaustion. Around midnight, I sat at the nurse's station, reviewing charts. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the old building. Suddenly, I heard a faint sound, like a soft hum, coming from down the hall. My stomach tightened. I stood straining to listen. The humming grew louder, almost melodic, but unsettling. It seemed to come from room 307, a room that had been empty for weeks. My heart pounded as I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the sound. The hallway stretched before me, feeling longer than it should. The hum turned into a faint, chilling laugh. My grip on the flashlight tightened as I reached the door. Slowly, I pushed it open, the hinges groaning in protest. The room was dark, the air inside colder than the rest of the floor. My flashlight beams swept across the bed, empty, as expected. But in the corner, something moved. A shadow, darker than the surrounding darkness, seemed to ripple. "Hello?" My voice wavered, barely above a whisper. The shadow didn't respond. Instead, it stretched, forming the outline of a woman. Her face was obscured, but her presence was suffocating. I stumbled back, my heart racing. I fled back to the nurse's station, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. Maybe the lack of sleep was getting to me. But as I sat down, the monitors began to flicker, their steady beeps turning erratic. Something was wrong. The air grew colder, and the faint laugh returned, this time echoing through the halls. I felt a chill run down my spine. One by one, the lights in the hallway began to dim, leaving me bathed in a flickering glow. I checked the security cameras, but the screens were filled with static. Then, for a brief moment, an image flickered. A woman, pale and gaunt, standing in the hallway outside room 307. Her eyes seemed to pierce through the screen. A loud crash jolted me from my seat. The sound came from room 312, one of my patients' rooms. I rushed over, my heart in my throat. The door was ajar, swinging slightly as if someone had just passed through. Inside, the patient was sitting upright, their eyes wide with terror. "She's here," they whispered, their voice shaking. "She wants us all." Before I could respond, they collapsed back onto the bed, unconscious. The monitors around them flatlined briefly before stabilizing. Panic set in as I backed out of the room. The hallway felt darker now, the oppressive cold pressing against my skin. I needed to call for help, but when I picked up the phone, the line was dead. The elevator at the end of the hallway dinged, its doors sliding open, but no one stepped out. Instead, a shadow spilled into the hall, moving toward me with unnatural fluidity. The laughter returned, louder and closer. I ran, my footsteps echoing in the empty halls. The shadow followed, gaining on me no matter how fast I moved. I ducked into a supply closet, slamming the door shut and holding my breath as the laughter passed by. For a moment, everything was silent. I dared to peek through the crack in the door, but the hallway was empty. Just as I exhaled, the laughter erupted behind me. I turned to see her, the pale woman, her hollow eyes staring into mine. She reached out, her bony fingers grazing my arm. The touch was ice cold, sending a jolt of pain through my body. "Leave us," she hissed, her voice echoing with an otherworldly resonance. I stumbled back, knocking over shelves as I scrambled for the door. Bursting into the hallway, I ran toward the exit, but it felt like the halls were shifting, elongating, trapping me inside. The laughter and whispers surrounded me, growing louder with every step. My vision blurred with tears. Finally, I reached the stairwell and practically threw myself down the steps. The shadows seemed to chase me, but as I reached the ground floor, the air grew lighter. The oppressive cold lifted, and the laughter faded into silence. I stumbled outside, gasping for air. The night felt safe, almost normal, but I knew I couldn't go back. The hospital wasn't just haunted. It was a trap, a playground for something evil. And it wasn't done with me yet.
The hospital corridors stretched long and empty under the dim fluorescent lights. My shift had ended hours ago, but I stayed late to finish some paperwork. The quiet was a welcome change from the chaos of the day, or so I thought. As I packed my bag, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. A faint sound echoed through the hallway. Footsteps? No one else should have been here this late. I shook off the feeling and headed for the exit. Halfway down the corridor, I heard it again, footsteps slow and deliberate. I turned, expecting to see a colleague, but the hallway was empty. The fluorescent lights flickered, and the air seemed heavier. "Hello," I called, my voice echoing. No response. The sound of footsteps resumed, this time closer. My pulse quickened as I quickened my pace toward the parking lot. Something wasn't right. Reaching the elevator, I pressed the button repeatedly, willing it to arrive faster. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by a faint, raspy breathing. My heart pounded as the elevator doors finally slid open. Inside the elevator, I jabbed the button for the ground floor. As the doors closed, I caught a glimpse of a figure at the end of the hallway. Tall, clad in dark clothing, they stood motionless. The doors shut before I could make out any details. I told myself it was nothing, a lingering nurse or security guard. But deep down I knew better. The elevator ride felt agonizingly slow, and when the doors opened, the parking lot stretched before me, dimly lit and eerily silent. I walked quickly to my car, scanning the lot. Shadows loomed, and every sound felt amplified. My car keys jingled in my hand as I unlocked the door and slid inside, locking it immediately behind me. Just as I started the engine, a figure appeared in the rearview mirror, standing at the edge of the lot, the same tall silhouette from the hallway. My hands trembled as I put the car in gear and sped out of the lot. Driving through the quiet streets, I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. I checked my mirrors constantly, but the roads were empty. Still, the sense of unease lingered, gnawing at me. When I arrived home, the silence of my apartment was almost suffocating. I double-checked the locks on the doors and windows before sitting on the couch, trying to calm my nerves. But then, the knock came. It was soft at first, almost hesitant. I froze, staring at the door. The knock came again, louder this time. "Who is it?" I called, but there was no answer. My heart raced as I grabbed a kitchen knife and approached the door. Peering through the peephole, I saw no one. The hallway outside was empty. I opened the door cautiously, knife in hand, but the space was deserted. A cold breeze swept past me, raising goosebumps on my skin. I shut the door and turned to find a note slipped under it. Written in shaky, almost frantic handwriting, it read, "You killed her. Now you'll pay." My breath caught in my throat as the weight of the words sank in. The name at the bottom of the note sent chills down my spine, Emily. I remembered her, a patient who hadn't made it through surgery. Her family had been devastated, but I had done everything I could. Or had I? The night stretched on as I tried to convince myself it was a cruel prank. But every creak of the floorboards, every shadow on the wall, made my paranoia grow. I didn't sleep that night, and when the sun rose, I felt no safer. Over the next few days, the harassment escalated. My phone rang with calls from unknown numbers, silent except for raspy breathing. I found more notes, each one more menacing than the last. "You can't hide. She's waiting." The figure appeared more frequently now, always at a distance, but unmistakably there. I saw them outside my office, in the grocery store, even parked across the street from my apartment. I reported it to the police, but without proof, they could do nothing. One night, I woke to the sound of breaking glass. My living room window was shattered, and a photo of me and my family lay on the floor, the glass frame splintered. The words "You're next" were scrawled across the photo in red ink. Desperation turned to fear as I decided to confront the figure. Armed with a bat, I waited in my apartment, the lights off, the silence deafening. When the knock came again, I flung the door open, ready to face them. But no one was there. Instead, a shadow slipped past me into the apartment, its form twisting unnaturally. The air grew icy, and the faint scent of hospital disinfectant filled the room. A whisper filled my ears. "You should have saved her." The shadow coalesced into a figure, Emily, or what was left of her. Her gaunt face and hollow eyes bore into me as she stepped closer. "You failed me," she said, her voice echoing with sorrow and rage. I tried to speak, to apologize, but my words caught in my throat. She raised a hand, and an invisible force slammed me against the wall. Pain shot through my body as she loomed over me, her presence suffocating. "You don't deserve peace," she hissed. Darkness engulfed the room, and I felt the cold seep into my bones. My vision blurred as her laughter echoed, growing louder and more distorted. Then everything went silent. When I woke, the apartment was empty. The notes, the shattered glass, and even the photo were gone. But her words lingered in my mind, and the coldness in my chest never left. Every shadow, every sound reminded me she was still there, waiting to finish what she started.
It started as a dare. "Come on, we'll just check it out," Jamie said, his grin mischievous. The abandoned St. Mercy's Hospital had loomed over our small town for decades, a monument to forgotten nightmares. Against my better judgment, I agreed to go. The four of us, Jamie, Claire, Riley, and me, stood outside the crumbling facade, flashlights in hand. The night was unnaturally quiet, as if the world was holding its breath. The hospital's windows were black voids, and the air smelled faintly of mildew and decay. "All right, let's make it quick," Claire said, her voice betraying her nerves. Jamie pushed the heavy front door, and it creaked open with a groan that echoed through the empty halls. The beam of my flashlight swept over peeling paint and broken tiles as we stepped inside. The air was stale and cold, heavy with the weight of years of abandonment. "Let's stick together," I said, but Jamie was already ahead, his flashlight bobbing down the corridor. "This place is massive," Riley muttered, his voice hushed. We explored the first floor cautiously. Old hospital beds lay overturned, and papers were scattered across the floor, yellowed with age. Faded posters on the walls warned about hygiene and patient safety. It felt like the hospital had been abandoned in a hurry. A sound broke the silence, a faint shuffling from somewhere above us. We froze, exchanging uneasy glances. "Probably rats," Jamie said with a shrug, but his bravado seemed forced. "Let's check upstairs," he added. Reluctantly, we followed him. The staircase groaned under our weight, and the second floor was even more unsettling. Wheelchairs sat abandoned in the hall, their wheels rusted. A faint, almost imperceptible humming noise filled the air, and my stomach churned with unease. We entered what seemed to be a patient ward. The rooms were small and empty, save for rusted bed frames and broken medical equipment. "This place is creepy as hell," Claire whispered. "Let's head back." But Jamie wasn't ready to leave. "One more floor," he said, pointing to the staircase at the end of the hall. "Come on, we've made it this far." Against my better judgment, we followed him. The third floor was different. The air was colder and the humming noise was louder. My flashlight flickered and I felt a wave of nausea. Riley stopped abruptly. "Do you hear that?" he asked. We all fell silent, straining to listen. A faint voice, a woman's voice, whispered from down the hall. "Help me." The sound sent chills down my spine. "This isn't funny, Jamie," Claire said, her voice shaking. Jamie shook his head, his face pale. "That wasn't me." We moved cautiously toward the source of the voice. The door to a room at the end of the hall was slightly ajar, and a faint light flickered inside. My heart pounded as we stepped closer, the sense of dread growing with each step. Inside the room, an old hospital bed stood in the center, its sheets pristine despite the decay around it. A figure sat on the bed, a woman in a hospital gown, her head bowed. Her hair was matted, and her skin was pale and translucent. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The woman lifted her head slowly and I gasped. Her eyes were hollow, black voids that seemed to pull the light from the room. Her mouth twisted into a grotesque smile. The door slammed shut behind us and the woman stood, her movements jerky and unnatural. "I've been waiting for you," she said, her voice a distorted echo. The air grew colder and the light in the room dimmed until it was nearly dark. Riley screamed and bolted for the door, but it wouldn't budge. The woman's body contorted, her limbs bending at impossible angles as she moved toward us. I backed away, my flashlight trembling in my hand. "What do you want?" Jamie shouted. The woman stopped abruptly, her head snapping toward him. "A body," she said, her voice a guttural growl. "Yours will do nicely." She lunged at him and chaos erupted. We fought to escape, but the room seemed to shift and warp around us. The walls closed in and the air grew heavier. Riley vanished first, his screams fading into silence. Then Claire. One moment she was beside me, the next she was gone. Jamie and I were the only ones left. He grabbed my arm, his face etched with terror. "We have to get out of here," he said. The woman, or whatever she was, hovered in the corner, her black eyes fixed on us. The door finally gave way and we stumbled into the hall. But the hospital was no longer the same. The corridors stretched endlessly, and the humming noise was deafening. Jamie turned to me, panic in his eyes. "She's not going to let us leave." I turned to reply, but Jamie was gone. His flashlight lay on the floor, flickering weakly. The humming stopped, replaced by a chilling silence. I was alone. The woman's voice echoed around me, soft and mocking. "You can't run. You can't hide." Her laughter filled the air as I stumbled through the endless corridors, my mind unraveling. I found myself back in the same room, the pristine hospital bed waiting for me. The woman stood beside it, her grotesque smile wider than ever. "It's your turn," she said, reaching out with twisted hands. Darkness engulfed me and a cold, suffocating pressure wrapped around my chest. My screams echoed in the void, unheard and unanswered. The last thing I saw was her hollow eyes, consuming everything. They found the hospital empty the next morning, our flashlights and backpacks abandoned in the corridor. No trace of us remained, except for the whispers that now haunt anyone who dares to enter. They say she's still waiting, searching for her next body.